David, you are live here on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hi. So what I wanted to call about changed once I heard you guys talking at the beginning of the show. So I'm a closeted bisexual. That's the label I'm using.
Sure.
But I grew up conservative Christian fundamentalist family. Dad's a pastor. Where homosexuality and any other sexuality that wasn't hetero was an affliction of the devil or a mental illness, which in that philosophy, it was an affliction of the devil anyway.
Right, yeah, it's just a demon. Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's what I grew up with. And so I have those concepts still kind of ingrained. I'm a relatively new atheist and skeptic, but I still struggle with that label, bisexual, because of that. There was a incident growing up. I was 6 or 7 with a child molester. And so forever, my view in my own head was that is what caused this attraction to men, and it's a sexual attraction. That's another thing I've heard from people in the LGBTQ community, and I haven't heard anything against it, is that I don't have any romantic notions towards men. It's purely sexual, and that means that I'm not technically in the LGBTQ community. It's just a fetish for male genitalia.
Sure. I mean, I recognize this is pretty heavy material, so I want to be really respectful even as I kind of jump in here. We can, play fun games with words all day and talk about the difference between being homosexual versus homoromantic, about whether or not cockhounds might be a term that we could throw around and whether or not they fit into the bisexual community. And there's some value in that sort of like parsing discussion, but ultimately, you are who you are. That's not changing just because of the language that we drag it through. And if the thing that you are is an idea that can be communicated to other people with a word, and that word is bisexual, then great. We don't need to get any further into it than that.
Yeah, I echo that. It's like whatever label makes you most comfortable and whatever community you feel like you can relate to in your experiences with, I mean, I say go for it. Like this kind of gatekeeping that happens, it's unfortunate, but it happens with lots of communities, not just like LGBT communities. It happens with the atheist community. It happens with Christian communities. It happens with all kinds of communities. And
well, particularly marginalized communities. When there are resources to go around, you get a little bit more picky about who you give them to. And so I recognize that the queer community writ large can be very exclusionary, but I think that just goes to show the amount of pressure that they've been under, that we've been under for so many generations. As that changes, we start to see a little bit more inclusivity.
Yeah. So, I mean, what do you think about that, David?
Okay. So, trying to think of how to articulate this best. So I guess the main mental block that I'm having is that idea that event that happened to me as a child is the cause of my attraction.
Yeah, I hear that's what it's coming down to for you. And I will just say that I can't tell you about you or tell you about your experiences, but I can tell you that there's really no data or evidence in hundreds and thousands of different research studies, different survey results, different demographic looks, different longitudinal examinations. Like, there's so many ways that we've tried to look at this question, and the only thing that we can find that may be even vaguely trauma related in terms of your orientation would be trauma in the wound in terms of androgens and access to hormones. Even that research is really inconclusive and kind of confusing. So if anything, I would suggest that your sexuality may have been limited by a painful experience, that traumatic experience may have blocked off parts of your body or parts of your experience. And so there may be things that you are potentially able to be interested in, things that you might be drawn to or attracted to, people that you might be interested in, that you are perhaps repulsed by or made uncomfortable by because of negative associations and because of that traumatic reaction. I can't say that there's any reason, though, to think that you would have been straight if you hadn't have had these traumatic experiences. There's just no data to back that up. And while I respect your experience, I hope that you can put that demon to rest a little bit tonight, because there's just no reason to believe it's true.
Well said, Christy. Well said.
So, coming off of that, because of how I grew up in a purity culture, on top of that experience, there's a lot of guilt. The times where I have had sexual interactions with other men, any sexual interaction, of course, brings guilt from that purity culture, but it's compounded when it's with someone of the same gender. Do you have any suggestions of resources or just advice for dealing with that or starting down the path to deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, sexual healing can be a really complex journey. You know, I would really recommend, more so than picking up a particular book or taking an interest in a particular podcast, these sound like the type of issues that you're going to want to talk to with a LGBTQ affirming or a very sex positive therapist. You know, I might point you, just last night on Secular Sexuality, we did an interview with Grace Stevenson about a new organization called Glimmer that helps provide people with connections to queer affirming therapists. And that may be, weglimmer.com could be a good place to start. Of course, the Secular Therapy Project, organizations like ASECT or even Psychology Today can help you get that relationship started. But I can't help but feel like that's going to be vital, because as much as you may be able to grow and learn on your own, there's a good bit of healing that needs to be done here. And that's something that's usually best when done with a little bit of help.
Okay. Yeah, and the Secular Therapy Project is something that I've sought out, but without insurance, finances are a deterrent.
Yeah, I recognize that. And so I would say Glimmer is another free organization that maybe will put you in touch. As finances are a concern, perhaps Psychology Today or something like openpath.org may be a better place to look, just to say that therapy is expensive and it can be difficult to access. But if you are persistent, if you make this a priority, there are perhaps more opportunities than you think.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. David, I can't tell you any more than what Christy can tell you. You know, Christy is definitely a bigger expert. If you wanted one book, I was going to recommend a book actually to a previous caller that I liked. It's called Gender Outlaw on Men, Women, and the Rest of Us by Kate Bornstein or Stein. Is it Stein? One of the two. I think that was... Okay. And you know, that book doesn't talk about purity culture as much. It was, you know, it was more related to the previous caller. But like, I think in reading in that experience of how somebody who grew up as one gender and then thought they were another gender and then didn't have any, you know, recognition through that, along with, you know, differences in figuring out their sexuality in an age where that was way less accepting than it is now. That was inspiring to me and kind of gave me you know, the insight into, wow, not only can somebody do this, but also they can have good reason to, and
Mhm.
they can find themselves in that and be confident in who they are and not have to feel the guilt that a purity culture has put on them. So that would be my one recommendation.
Okay.
Cool.
So that's Gender Outlaw.
That's Gender Outlaw. Yeah, Kate Bornstein or Stein, one of the two. But anyway, that's all the time we got for this call, David. But thanks so much for calling in. I hope Christy and I were helpful. Christy more so, obviously. But yeah, like man, like that's tough. You know, and that is that we're talking about stereotypes tonight. That's a stereotype that LGBT individuals are the victims of sexual abuse. And that is kind of the reason as to who they are. And gosh, how awful is that?
Yeah, and it plays into this like larger patriarchal idea that sex changes you on a fundamental level. That having sex with a man in particular, no matter who you are, is going to transfer you from being a virgin to a slut, is going to transfer you from being straight to being gay, from, turn people into these vampires. We are just made so uncomfortable by any sexuality that is outside of the norm, outside of what is considered common or typical, conventional or acceptable, that we'll come up with anything to demonize them with. And that gets in the way of trying to heal from a very real traumatic experience. The fact that this caller's bisexuality has been damaged is its own question and concern, because there's this larger issue of, why was he attacked in the first place? Why was this allowed to go on? And what have we done about it, in his life, but also just larger society? What are we doing to offer healing to these people rather than making them just feel ashamed because of something that happened to them?
Agree. It's this reversal of the standards that we live by. We had this hierarchy, I think people had, where you had straight people like myself and then everybody else down below, and now we're just trying to flip the script. We're not saying one's better than the other. We're just saying, hey, this is all on a spectrum of identities that people can be, and that's okay. There's no reason to discriminate on that basis alone. If someone's being an asshole to you, then maybe that's one reason why you're not going to be as nice to them or something. But that's separate from just like someone being who they are. That's not a great reason to discriminate somebody, right? And I'm using that word discriminate liberally in that sense, of course. What I mean, like I don't want to talk to this person, so I'm making that anyway. You know what I'm trying to say.